My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old. My daughter Lily is 11, and for 5 years, her entire world has been a blue gymnastics mat, 4 inches wide and 12 feet long. She was 3 when she started doing back bends in the living room. Not because I pushed her. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to the story. I was not a gymnastics mom who had a plan. I was a working mom who came home one evening to find her toddler folded in half against the couch, completely unbothered, watching cartoons upside down, and thought, okay, apparently this is who you are. By 6, she had outgrown every beginner class at the community center. By 8, her first coach, a woman named Donna, soft-spoken and methodical, who always said that a body is not your enemy, it's your partner, told me that Lily had something she couldn't teach: natural spatial awareness, the ability to feel where her body was in the air before she could see it. Some gymnasts spend years developing that. Lily had arrived with it. I held on to Dana's words longer than I should have. I used them to explain things I should have questioned. Dana's gym closed in October, 18 months ago. A lease issue, nothing dramatic, just over. We had 1 month to find somewhere new, and Lily spent that month sitting on the floor next to her competition bag every evening, like someone waiting for a bus that might not come. I found Coach Ryan through the Regional Association directory. His bio was thorough. Former national team member, 17 years coaching at elite level, multiple regional champions in the 12 and under category. The gym had a waiting list. We got in because someone dropped out. I should have asked why. The first meeting was in his office, a small room off the main floor that smelled like chalk and floor cleaner. He was in his early 50s, fit in the specific way of someone who has spent a lifetime in athletic spaces, and he had a manner that I now understand was calibrated. He looked at Lily the way a carpenter looks at wood. Then he looked at me. "I don't do recreational gymnastics," he said. "If your daughter wants to feel good about herself, there are other programs. I produce athletes. That's different." I nodded. I thought it sounded serious. Professional. "I'm going to push her past what's comfortable," he said. "That's how the body learns. If you're the kind of parent who calls when your child cries, this won't work." Lily was sitting next to me, very still, watching his face with the focused expression she uses when she's deciding whether to trust something. I watched her decide yes. I watched her nod. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. The first 3 months were difficult to read. Lily came home exhausted every day, the deep exhaustion of a body that has been asked for more than it thought it had. She went to bed earlier. She ate more. She had bruises she didn't mention because bruises were normal now, part of the landscape of elite training. But she also came home talking about elements she was learning, about the other girls on the team, Zoe, who could do a perfect aerial cartwheel, and Priya, who was afraid of the beam but working on it, and Hannah, who was quiet but fast. She used Coach Ryan's name constantly. Coach Ryan says the release matters more than the catch. Coach Ryan says fear is just information. Coach Ryan says if you're not scared, you're not growing. I thought, she has a mentor. This is what mentorship looks like. I was a fool. The first thing I noticed that I couldn't explain away was in January, 4 months in. Lily stopped wearing shorts at home. She had always been unself-conscious about her body the way athletic children often are. Functional, matter-of-fact, uninterested in mirrors. Now she changed with the door closed and wore layers to breakfast, even on warm mornings. I asked once. She said she was cold. I let it go. The second thing was food. She had always been a straightforward eater, hungry after practice, particular about a few things, otherwise uncomplicated. Now she ate quickly and without pleasure, eyes on the plate, tracking quantities I couldn't see her tracking. One evening I found a granola bar wrapper tucked into the lining of her gym bag. Not hidden exactly, but not in the trash. I asked if everything was okay at the gym. She said yes. She said it the way kids say it when the answer is no, but they've decided you can't help. I let it go again. I want to write that down because it matters. I let it go. More than once. More than twice. I was busy and I trusted the process. And every time I almost asked the real question, I told myself she'd tell me if something was wrong. She'd always told me things before. What I didn't understand was that Coach Ryan had already changed the calculation. He had told her, in some version I didn't hear directly for months, that the girls who succeed are the ones who handle their own problems. That involving parents was a sign of weakness. That if she wanted to stay in Group A, the competitive track, the one with access to regional meets, she needed to be the kind of athlete who figured things out herself. She was 11 years old. She wanted to stay in Group A. She figured things out herself. The night I found out, I hadn't planned anything. I was early because a work call canceled, and I drove to the gym with 40 minutes to spare, thinking I'd wait in the parking lot. The parent area, a row of plastic chairs in a corridor, separated from the gym floor by a half wall and a frosted glass partition, was empty. The other parents arrived closer to pick up time. I was the only one there. The partition didn't block sound. I heard his voice before I heard what he was saying. That particular cadence, loud, deliberate, designed to fill a large space, and then the words themselves, and I sat very still and listened and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. You think this is hard? This is nothing. The girls I've worked with who made nationals did this at 6 a.m. on broken sleep. You want to cry? Cry faster. We have work to do. A pause. The sound of someone breathing hard. Lily. Again. And this time, don't embarrass yourself in front of the team. Then, the sound of a body landing wrong. A small sound. Not a scream. Not dramatic. Just a short, involuntary breath. The sound a person makes when something hurts and they're trying not to show it. That's pathetic. You've been doing this element for 3 months. If you can't commit, I pull you from the showcase and Priya takes your spot. Is that what you want? You want Priya to take your spot? I sat in that plastic chair and I listened to my daughter say, "No, sir," in a voice I didn't recognize, thin and careful, the voice of someone who has learned that any reaction is the wrong reaction. I didn't go in. I want to explain that because it looks like the wrong choice, and in some ways it was. But I knew, in the specific way that you know things when you've been paying close attention to someone for 11 years, that if I walked in there, Lily would spend the drive home managing my emotions. She would comfort me. She would explain that it wasn't that bad. She would protect him because she was afraid of what happened to girls who didn't. I took out my phone. I opened the voice recorder. I set it on the ledge of the half wall behind a water bottle someone had left there, and I went back to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 38 minutes. When she came out, she was walking normally, her bag over one shoulder, her hair still pulled back. She saw my car and came over and got in and said, "Hi, how was your day?" And I said, "Fine," and we drove 3 blocks before I said, "Lily, I was in the corridor today." Silence. I heard some of the practice. More silence. Then, very quietly, "How much?" "Enough." She looked out the window. For a long time, neither of us said anything. I let the silence do the work because I knew that she was deciding something, and if I pushed, she would close and I would lose her. Finally, she said, "He's like that with everyone. It's not just me." I know. Zoe cried for a whole hour after practice once, and he made her do conditioning until she stopped. "Tell me more." She told me. She talked for 45 minutes. She talked about the comments about her body. "You think that stomach is going to get you on a podium?" Delivered in front of the team. Delivered casually, the way you'd comment on the weather. She talked about the punishment system. One girl's mistake meant everyone ran extra circuits, which meant the girls watched each other constantly for errors, which meant Lily had spent months carrying the weight of every imperfect landing as a social debt she owed to her teammates. She talked about the weigh-ins. Unofficial, never written down, but real. Coach Ryan standing by the scale on Monday mornings, making comments that weren't quite instructions, but everyone understood. She talked about the day he'd thrown a training weight onto the mat 2 feet from Hannah's head because Hannah had looked at her phone during a correction. She talked and I drove, and I kept my face neutral because she needed to finish and she was watching me out of the corner of her eye, tracking my reaction, ready to stop if I made this about myself. When she finished, I said, "None of that is okay. Not one thing you just described is normal or acceptable." She looked at me. Something in her face did a complicated thing. Relief and grief and something that looked like fury finally, now that there was room for it. "The other moms know," she said. "Some of them. They say it's how elite sports work." "They're wrong." He said if any of us told our parents and it became a problem, he'd move the serious girls to the Saturday group and the rest of us would be in recreational. He called it the consequence of not having the right mentality. I added that to the folder I was already building in my head. That night, after Lily was asleep, I took the recording off my phone and put it in a cloud folder. Then I opened the parent group chat, 42 members, and sent a single message. "I'd like to talk to some of you privately, not in this chat. Can anyone whose daughter has mentioned something concerning about practice reach out to me directly?" Within 2 hours, I had 7 private messages. Not all of them were ready to do anything. 2 said they were afraid of losing their daughter's spots. 1 said she'd thought about it, but her husband disagreed. 1 said she'd raised it with the club director 6 months ago and been told that high-level coaching required a different standard. But 3 of them were ready. Sarah, whose daughter had come home from practice, unable to eat dinner for the 3rd time in a month. Michelle, whose daughter had started flinching when adults raised their voices. At home, in school, everywhere, not just at the gym. And Anne, who had her own recording, made through a gap in the partition on a different evening, because she'd been carrying the same folder I had and hadn't known what to do with it alone. We met at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening while the girls were at school. I had a printed timeline, 17 specific incidents, dated, sourced from conversations with Lily, and corroborated by at least 1 other parent in each case. Anne brought her recording. Sarah brought 2 photographs of her daughter's wrists, where the resistance bands had been pulled too tight during a correction and left marks. We looked at everything on the table, and none of us said anything for a moment. Then Michelle said, "What do we actually want to happen?" I had thought about that question. I had thought about it at length, because I wanted to be clear on the answer before I walked into any room. "I want him removed," I said. "Not reassigned. Not given a warning. Removed. And I want the club director to acknowledge that this was reported before, and nothing was done, because that's also a problem." They nodded. Sarah had already looked into the regional association's disciplinary process. There was a formal complaint pathway. There was a child protection officer on the regional board. The process had teeth if you knew how to use them. We knew how to use them by the end of that evening. The complaint was filed on a Monday. It named Coach Ryan specifically and included the recordings, the photographs, the written incident timeline, and a request for formal investigation under the regional association's safeguarding policy. The club director called me on Tuesday. He was careful. He was the kind of man who knew how to be careful on the phone. Not hostile, not dismissive, technically polite. He said he took these matters very seriously. He said there would be an internal review. He said he hoped we could handle this through the proper channels without things becoming, as he put it, unnecessarily public. I told him we had filed with the regional association directly, not with the club. A longer pause. I also told him I was aware that a complaint had been filed through his club 8 months ago regarding Coach Ryan's conduct and that it had not been escalated. I said that if the current complaint revealed that the club had been notified and had not acted, we were prepared to take that finding to the Regional Association's board, and if necessary, to the local press. He said he would be in touch. He was in touch that afternoon. The club was suspending Coach Ryan pending the investigation. The Saturday group would be covered by a substitute coach. Refunds for the affected weeks would be issued. I told him that was a start. The regional investigation took 3 weeks. They interviewed the girls. With parents present, with a child protection officer in the room. Lily was in that room for 40 minutes. I sat next to her and watched her describe, calmly and clearly and without drama, what the last 8 months had felt like. She didn't cry. She held her own hands in her lap and she told the truth, and when they asked if she was sure about specific incidents, she said, "Yes, I'm sure. I wrote some of it down." I looked at her when she said that. She had written it down, on her own, without telling me. My 11-year-old had been keeping her own documentation. The investigation upheld the complaint. Coach Ryan's coaching license was suspended for 2 years pending further review. The club director received a formal warning from the Regional Association for failure to escalate the earlier complaint. The gym issued a public statement. It was careful and vague and did not say his name, but the community was small enough that it didn't need to. 6 of the 7 families whose daughters trained in Lily's group left the club. 3 of them went to a gym across town with a coach I had researched carefully before I said anything to anyone. A woman named Karen, who had trained at national level and now ran a program specifically designed around athlete well-being alongside performance. The waiting list was 3 months. I got Lily on it. The 3 months were quiet ones. She trained at the community center, loosely, without pressure. Some days she didn't want to train at all, and I didn't make her. Some days she went on her own and came home with that brightness in her face that I hadn't seen in almost a year, and I didn't say anything. I just made dinner and let it be there. She asked me once during those months if I thought she was good enough to keep going. We were in the kitchen. She was sitting on the counter, which she's not supposed to do, and I was making tea, and the question landed quietly like it had been waiting for a quiet moment. "Good enough by whose standard?" I said. She thought about it. "Mine." "Then you're the only one who can answer that." She was quiet for a while. "I think I still love it," she said. "I just need to remember why." She found out why on her first day with Karen. Karen ran the session without a single comment about anyone's body, their weight, their size. She ran it without punishment for mistakes. When a girl fell, she said, "Good attempt. Let's look at the takeoff together." When Lily landed a clean back walkover, Karen said nothing dramatic. No performance, no reward dispensing, just nodded and said, "That's yours. You built that." Lily came home with chalk on her hands and that brightness back in full, and she sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Mom." She called it mine, like it belongs to me. I sat down across from her. "It does," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the careful, processing expression I have been watching since she was 3 years old, folded in half on the living room rug. "Yeah," she said. "I know." She has her first showcase with the new gym in 6 weeks. It's not a competition. There are no judges. It's an end-of-term performance for families, 30 minutes in a school gymnasium. Nothing elaborate. She has been practicing her floor routine every evening this week in the living room, which is where she started, which feels like something. Yesterday she stopped in the middle of a run-through and looked at me from across the room. "Mom, what if I mess up in front of everyone?" "Then you'll have messed up in front of everyone," I said. "And?" She thought about it, then she shrugged. "And nothing, I guess," she said. She went back to the beginning of the routine. She ran it clean. I've thought a lot about whether I went too far, about the phone call with the club director, the formal complaint, the regional investigation, the public statement. about the fact that a man's livelihood was affected, that girls lost their training environment mid-season, that the process was hard and slow and not without cost. I have thought about Lily at the kitchen table at 10:30 at night, whispering to herself in the bathroom mirror that if she didn't gain weight, he would keep her. I didn't go too far. I should have gone sooner. If this story stayed with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Tender Heart Stories. Drop your location in the comments. USA, UK, Canada, Australia, wherever you're watching from. I read every single one, and tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? See you in the next one.